Taylor Ellwood here with Magical Experiments, and I have the fabulous, the amazing, the powerful, the witchy Diana Rajchel. Do I have your last name correct?
It's Rachel.
Rachel. Okay, see, I did a little bit of a dramatic flair. There you go.
I mean, I could make you pronounce it the traditional way, but nobody needs that much phlegm in their life. So
Oh, very good. Well, please introduce yourself and tell us who you are.
I am Diana Rachel. I am author of Hex Twisting Counter Magic Spells for the Irritated Witch. And yes, I really was irritated, which is what led to that collection of spells. And Urban Magic, a Guide for the City Witch. I am better known internationally for my books Samhain and Mabon, that were the installments of Llewellyn Sabbath Essential series. And hi, I am a practicing witch and spirit worker. I guess you could say I'm sort of solo in connected community as opposed to a coven witch or an order person. And a lot of what I do is sharing my wisdom from times when I decided to fly by the seat of my pants, so you do not have to be as stupid as I was.
Heard. I identify with that statement on so many different levels. I think you and I both been that person at different times.
We should have the t-shirt that say, "Hi, I'm lucky I'm alive. Ask me how. Don't take notes."
Yeah, don't take notes. That's good. Well, I read your book on the counter magic, the hexing or the anti-hexing book. I thought it was really fascinating. I was at the time I was reading it, I was doing research because I'm writing a book right now on called Walking with Demonic Spirits. And of course, one of the
Oh, okay.
aspects
There
of
was a
that,
sudden drag. Let me see if there's something going on with my good
uh-uh.
computer.
Okay.
Let's play nice
Yeah.
internet.
You froze there for a moment.
I did. I'm going to see. Give me a moment. I know
Okay.
we recently did some.
All right, so we're back. We had to pause for a few moments because the ethers of the interwebs were so disturbed by our amazing collection of power that they couldn't handle us, and so we had to re-stabilize the space-time continuum in order to make this work.
Sure, we'll go with that.
All right, so anyway, as I was saying, I started reading your book because I was doing research for my book, Walking with Demonic Spirits, and not that demons are always used for cursing or anything like that, but at the same time, I thought, well, it'd be kind of interesting to read this book in relationship to some of the books on cursing I found in relationship to the demonic magic. Let's. So that's my story behind why I started reading it. But tell me, like, what prompted you to write this book? Because you obviously have a story in and of itself in the book. You talk about it a bit in the book, but of course, it's always better to hear it live.
In some ways, that story is still going because just because the book was done did not mean the situation was done. Apparently, I piss people off. And some of them are magical people that are not good at emotional regulation. And it turned out there was a mix of several things that kind of converged all at once. Um, on top of that, it came out during I moved to San Francisco in 2014, and there is something about that city where you are not allowed to keep your masks. You are not allowed to keep the things you hide behind. It will rip you to shreds one way or the other. So I went there thinking I was in a heteronormative closed relationship. And within 3 months, my ex turned to me and said, "I'm a woman." And things just kind of got more bizarre from there. And there were so many things going on. I'm not even sure how to pick them apart. The other part is I ended up getting a psychiatric diagnosis and a shamanic diagnosis as a profound empath in the same week. So I do want to address, because there's a lot of people going, empaths aren't real. They're people with bad boundaries. That can be true. A lot of people think they are empaths that are not. A lot of people think being an empath is something that they are not, that it is not. It is not necessarily a psychic ability. It is a byproduct of bad boundaries, but it is also a byproduct of having a different than standard energy body order, as I figured out. So your emotional body's all the way on the outside. So of course, if you're running around a place like San Francisco, you may as well be a licked lollipop rolling down the street after the Pride Parade. It is not good. And it takes extra work, and you pick up other people's stuff on top of it. Usually empaths become that way through some kind of stress that makes it expedient to feel somebody else's emotions before your own. So of course, trying to fix everybody around you so you think you can make your work perfect instead of going on dealing with what's within. So I had a lot of that going on, especially being raised Midwestern. And this is not a good combination with someone like me who is good at magic and naturally psychic in a way that some people are good at math. It was a bad combination because there isn't, it's starting to get better, especially as more people are becoming more open about their ancestral healing and about taking responsibility for shadow work, although I have some comments about shadow work and its misuse and spiritual bypassing.
We'll
But
get to
it
those.
is, yes, we will. I am a walking encyclopedia of all the things to talk about, which is why people like usually see me once a year. That's about all they can take. But um there was a lot going on with the empath thing, both in the psychological and the level. On top of it, having a partner transition suddenly and having kept it secret until I was out of my community and my connections that included several trans people that could have helped both of us adjust. And dropping me into a community where she had been doing some pre-networking and I had to start from zero in a completely different culture than what I was used to. For those outside the US is so not a monolith. Just stop watching your TV. You'll get a bit more accurate view. Um,
That's true.
but
No, I mean, you go to different parts of the US and it is different. I mean, I grew up on the East Coast, I lived in the Midwest, and now I live in the Pacific Northwest, and it is each region has its own difference. I mean, there really is a truth to East Coast edge. Let's just put it that
there
way.
there there really is. And there is I have moved around enough to have experienced a lot of culture shock. And
Yeah.
this is without the times I've managed to leave the country. I mean, they always send me back. That probably says something, but there's a lot going on with the empath thing where it was basically out of control energy, borrowing other people's problems instead of dealing with my own, and having problems that I had no frame of reference for dealing with a whole lot of other relationship trauma issues and things going on. And I started coming in with identifying as eclectic Wiccan, more or less sticking by the harm none in a very specific way as I'd come to understand it. I have the spells and the hearth keeping that worked for me, and I found myself called to be a city priest for San Francisco, of all places, which is one of the hardest levels you could go at, and I'm starting right there. And I am being called to basically do almost like the Anana stripping before a Rush Gagal, pulling off everything I believed. Which makes it interesting because, of course, eclectic Wicca really likes to say there's no such thing as demons. Like, there's a lot of people who insist that it's not real, that it's all framed within their understanding of Satanism. And one thing I have come out of this saying very emphatically is I don't care what religion you practice, you should not be using it to explain phenomena. And I mean this because of demons. Because demons do exist and they do not give a flying F what your religion says about whether they exist or not. And, like Beelzebub is the great scientist. Do you think he doesn't know how to collect data? Give me a break.
No, it's true.
So,
And I always find that kind of interesting when people try to categorize spirits. It's actually one of the chief arguments that I make in some of my own writing. It's like, well, you're categorizing them because you're trying to fit them into human terms and understanding, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's accurate. That's a human frame of reference that you're using to try and explain something that is not human and has its own
and
frame of reference, and that
mhm.
frame of reference is not necessarily in agreement with yours because it has its own wants and needs that we may not even fully get or understand.
Demons, fairies, jinn all have their own cultures. Like, they are neighbors. And I can tell you right now, a jinn is not going to respond to your Christian prayers or to a Wiccan banishing. It's a jinn. And Fortunately, most people don't get far enough into the weeds to have to break with their own preconceptions to the degree that I had to. And I know I would say at the time when I moved there, my spirituality was entirely human centered. And you become a priest to a city, even though most city spirits are built from human consciousness in some way. That is a non-human centered relationship. You know, a city, a collective intelligence is very different for, especially in our culture, from the individual intelligence. I am now engaged to an animist who is a Sami and Finnish American shaman, actual recognized shaman. And I was already leaning towards animism, but having a spiritual practice and a magical practice that is non-human centered has been profoundly enlightening, and I've been finding it really valuable in the way that it lines up both with science and spirituality in a way where I'm not having those conflicts of this is real or this is not because my religion said so. And, you know, after you've had a demon standing over you going, look, lady, I'm sorry, I don't want to be doing this either. If you can make me a sandwich, we can work something out. That's a very different way of experiencing demons from you see in the movies. And it's the, okay, this thing that I am not supposed to believe in, yeah, let's just go to my fridge and talk. Like, it's not what you would expect at all.
Well, it's not, and it's actually one of the things that it's one of the points that I like to make in my own writing, which is that spirits are relational beings, and if you understand that, you can actually work out and create your own relationships with them. A huge part of the problem is that that categorization is essentially strips out that relational component. And of course, we see that in human relationships as well. How often do people end up in a situation where it's like, well, you're X, you're Y, you're Z, et cetera, and there's not a relational component, or somebody to kind of use what you shared earlier, somebody keeps something from you because they're afraid of being relational with you, and as a
Mm-hmm.
result, it actually damages the relationship immensely.
Yeah,
It's the same thing with spirits.
it is. And I know, especially, I wouldn't call myself a demonologer. I jokingly say that I am the most left-handed right-hand pather you're ever going to meet. It's just, I've kind of come to this lawful neutral, actually chaotic neutral, let's be real, what's me, place where it's the, my values are based on consent, which is a very modern concept. And it is consent with the spirits and working with allyships. I've been having a lot of very deep philosophical thoughts that are coming from my experience in hex twisting, where a whole bunch of people went at me for different reasons and it all just sort of came to a head. Because most of the time I was just uncrossing it, clearing it. I wasn't pushing back. And I honestly think that the demons were kind of watching, especially the ones getting contracted, going, this is not fair. This does not make sense, because a lot of people, I guess it's hard to stick to your values for a lot of people. And for me, it's the only way I can make sense of my world is to have the values and try to stick to them. Apparently that's hard for most people. And for me, it's just the thing that takes the least cognitive stress. Um, and when you get outside of what we've labeled as good and evil and look at it more as action, consequence, intent in this more complex thing, it's easier to step out of our Christian upbringing where everything is black and white and everything's a holy war, and start realizing that you don't have to participate in that, and the world just changing your view of the world completely changes it.
This is interesting because this kind of mirrors some of the exploration that I've been doing on my own journey right now. I'm doing a lot of work around defining my values and what it means to live a life of integrity.
Yeah.
And in order to, and this is part of just my own healing journey from my own trauma, all that other stuff. And this kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier, the importance of being able to differentiate between, okay, here's other people's stuff, here's my stuff. I need to work on my stuff first before I can serve my community, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, live your life according to your values. what are your values? What does that mean? What does it mean to live a life of integrity? Live that. Because then it becomes a lot easier, lo and behold, but it's not as strictly defined as it's this or it's this. It's no, let's look at it in the scope of what are my values. And a formula that I like to use, I got this from another a class that I've been taking, is E plus R equals O. Event plus response equals outcome.
Yeah, that's good. I know one of the added challenges I've had is I am a femme person with an opinion. People get extra reactive to that. And there's a lot of studies on I am non-conventionally attractive, which means that there are certain people that are biologically set to find me annoying just by existing. And they have been culturally taught to think that this is a me problem and not a them problem.
Yeah.
And so, like, I have had issues with misogynistic groups just trying to experiment on me. And I have had issues with like family prayer warrior stuff trying to drag me back in when I still have a relationship with Jesus. And Jesus went, no, 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 just don't do this. This is not for you, honey. And these are like, a lot of it is just I am trying to exist as a sovereign being in a femme body while speaking my truth. And that is profoundly challenging to a lot of people. And some of them have magic as a reactive tool. And again, I came in from 90s eclectic Wicca just after they had to do the satanic panic education. So of course, nice witches didn't do those things. You know, you thought that Wicca had the monopoly on all witchcraft. It does not. And there are so many cultural pieces there where, you know, I came in thinking, okay, who would really do that? We all share these values, supposedly. That was not correct. And just as intellectual as I can be very naive, especially about other people's moral inclinations and emotional regulation. And so I'm turning 50 next year, and I think I've finally learned enough, and I'm sure there is so much more I don't know, especially about human nature. And it's kind of that part that awfulness has been part of what's decentered me from humans, where my spirituality is no longer human centered. It is all about the relationships. And so I still keep certain people close to me. I have been extremely fortunate in that I have friendships going back 20 years that have stood the test of time and distance and all the stuff that would normally make a relationship fade. And the best ones have not. And I think it comes back to that non-human centered, but also looking for the values that actually mattered, looking for how these people make themselves feel about each other and about themselves, looking for, you know, is the community nourishing the self? Is the self nourishing the community in a good way? And just a lot of stuff that you know, I wish I'd known that back then. I wish I'd learned this back then. Because as it was, I'd withdrawn from the pagan community in Minneapolis because there were some good people I kept, but there was a lot of shittiness. And I have been hearing stories from other people that are starting to have the experiences like I did. And some of them are coming to me saying, can you please help me out of this, to the point where I've had to raise my rates a lot because I was getting overworked, because there are so many people dealing with being around magical people that are not taking responsibility for their emotional responses. And I tend to not reflect people's worldviews, and they think I'm being contrary when I'm really just trying to say, hey, there's more to this that you need to consider to really get somewhere successful with it. And some people just look at it as, you're telling me I'm wrong. And they don't respond well to that.
Yeah. I think there's also a component there, and this is something I found, and I'm curious as to your thought on this, is that, you know, if you're practicing magic and you haven't done your inner work, your magic tends to amplify that dysfunction. It tends to bring that out into the world around you. And it becomes very easy to blame things on what's going on in the world around you without seeing that it's really a mirror of what's going on
Yeah.
within you that you need to address and work. And here's the interesting aspect to this too. I've also found is that the more I've done the work on myself, the less need to do magic I've had, the more that I've just aligned and started living a very magical life where things fall into place because I've worked on my own stuff. That's its own thing. But what are your thoughts on what I just shared?
I think that you are dead on that the inner work is, it's really the point. Like almost all alchemical texts come back to what's within you. What's within you, and part of that inner work is again that decentering from the human perspective, because you're not just in a relationship with other humans. And and this is the unspoken thing. I mean, we kind of speak about it, we kind of make fun of it generationally. When you're human centered, you are constantly in pursuit of status. And so a lot of people get caught again, are looking outward and looking for, am I better than this person? Who can I compare myself to? You know, there's so little sense of self, being lost in the ugly humanity of it, that they do these dysregulated things in this constant battle for status. I want to teach that lady her place, or, you know, I just want to show you who I am, except you're not. You're showing how you want to see yourself reflected. And a lot of people take a long time to get the maturity to realize that every single thing they're doing is really about them, and everything is really coming from inside. And I want to express this without going into the toxic positivity of it's all in your control. No, there are external things that can suck. And pretending they don't is an insult to your experience. So I am not one to do that. And I'm not going to tell you there's deeper meaning. Sometimes a piano just falls on you when you're walking down the sidewalk. So it's
Yeah,
nobody's
that's
fault.
where we get into
Yeah.
toxic individualism, basically,
Yeah.
where it's like,
Yes.
and that doesn't help at all. I mean, I think that there's something very healthy about saying I am responsible for how I respond to a situation. I can
Yes.
choose that, but I'm not responsible for everything else. That's not realistic and it's not accurate, and it actually creates a it's like you're trying to take on the it's like you're trying to take on the weight of the universe at that point. Like how arrogant is that?
And exhausting.
Yeah,
Like
I
that's
know.
stressed out.
I just want to lay the weight down. I'm so tired.
Like that the constant anxiety wears you out. It's like running around going, I hate what she's wearing, and this person must be a slut, and this person looks dumb. Okay, so you have all these judgments, and they're wearing you out and making you dumber because you're wearing yourself out so you can't think as well. Like it just takes off so much stress, or even just looking for the things you like instead of looking for the things to offend you. And it's actually takes some discipline and a mindset switch. It really does. And so again, when I'm talking about these comparisons, these status, do you compare yourself to a mountain? Because I don't. Because whatever happens, that mountain decides it's going to avalanche or rocks fall, we all die. The mountain's going to get the final say. There's nothing to compare myself to. And so having that decentered really helps a lot with perspectives. And I'm seeing it as, okay, we are all equally vulnerable. We are all equally, no matter what we have or who's sitting on the largest pile of toys, the same things could still wipe us out. And while that's a little bit dark, it helps. It helps to just be reminded that everything is just acquired and building on the masks or not.
I think it. I think an interesting point to that too, that just kind of struck me as you said that, is that we're all equally helpless at different times. Like under the right circumstances, it doesn't matter how much quote unquote power you think, or money, or anything else that you think you have. You can still experience profound moments of helplessness because things are out of your control. The only thing that you have control over is how you choose to respond, and
Yeah.
you know that is what it is.
Yeah, and give some grace for moments of limbic hijack. We do have involuntary responses, but from there, your head will clear, and then you do have the choice to make a choice.
So you made a comment earlier, and I want to come back to that, which is around shadow work. So let's talk about that a bit and share further what your thoughts are on that, because I thought that was a really interesting comment.
So I teach like basic surface level, not surface level, but because this is the beginning of the dig, but I teach shadow work in the making you aware of aspects of yourself you may not directly be aware of. And these aren't necessarily, a lot of people think shadow, dark, automatically bad and evil. Again, this is partly comes from being over Abrahamized. Just quit the holy war and your brain will fix itself, I promise. And so it becomes easier to process these things. But there are a lot of people that approach shadow work going, this will make all of the things stop hurting, which is not what shadow work does or is meant to do. It is meant to go, this is where the pain comes from. This is what I have done to medicate myself, to survive, to make the thing happen. And I may or may not like this about myself. I may not be aware of this about myself. And it always comes back to the question of how do I want to be seen, and what am I afraid people will see? And these are not ones where you can make the hurting stop. In fact, it may be quite painful, because how you want to be seen and what you're afraid people will see shows you where your own self-perception and your own inner experience is not necessarily lining up with what is healthy for you. And if you're doing that, there's no bypassing, there's no skipping pain. There's a lot of, ugh, now how do I deal with this? So
Yeah.
it's more designing a coping plan. And a lot of people just do not want that. And it has to be re-explained all the time. You know, I've heard people talking about, well, if you're afraid, just choose to feel excitement. And I feel like that's still almost a form of bypassing. Like, I understand reframing. Sometimes reframing things help, especially I am a parent now, reframing helps with kids. And I know, Taylor, you have been a parent, so I'm sure you've had some experiences with that too.
Yes.
Um, yeah, you know, especially since like both of the kids have been raising are neurodivergent, so there's extra anxiety, extra processing stuff. One kid who's afraid of everything, and one who pretends he's not afraid of anything but then wakes me up in the middle of the night for tea. And so finding the different ways of communicating with that, and understanding that sometimes fear is telling you something you need to know. You know, it's the, I am hearing abnormal noises outside my house at night. Is this just one of the raccoons looking to mug someone, or is this a bigger problem? You know, learning to listen to that, as opposed to the, I have apprehension about this test or this new place I'm going. Okay, well, what are the specific fears and how can we respond to that? Yeah, it's, you don't just transmute, there's a reason to sometimes. And sometimes it risks lying to yourself, and inauthenticity with yourself is one of the fastest ways to jack yourself up.
Yeah, this kind of hits on something for me, which is I think that what people fail to recognize is that the quote unquote shadows or the protectors or whatever, because we also use parts work from like IFS, um, which is internal family systems. For those of you who don't know what that acronym is, I'll just put that out there. That you know there are parts of ourselves that are quote unquote in shadow that really are just specific behaviors, aspects of ourselves that have come into play because it's like, oh, I'm trying to protect something. Like we're not. I do think that like when people use that concept of shadow, like we talk about this in men's work, for example, which is the gold in the shadow. Well, and one of the points that's actually made is that the gold has its own shadow sometimes as well. So I think it's really important to recognize that, okay, our shadow work isn't about like trying to get rid of something or repress it. That's actually no, 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 no. That's not a good or healthy thing to do at all. It's learning to come back into alignment with all the parts of ourselves to heal those parts of ourselves that have been exiled, that have been pushed away, that maybe we feel toxic shame around or things like that. And when we can do that work, that's where things start to change in our lives, because what we're doing is we're reintegrating ourselves in a holistic way.
This actually sounds like something that I want to explore more, especially with the gold and the shadow concepts. So I'm probably going to ask you for some reading or something after this, because that really interests me.
Oh yeah.
Also, I am raising boys, which I never expected to do, so men's movement information might be helpful.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to help you out with that, for sure. I mean, I'm doing, as you probably know, I'm doing a lot of work around that right now.
Yeah, I've been watching. I've been I've been genuinely impressed.
Thank you. So, I think that kind of coming back to the topic where we come to this counter hexing and stuff, we have these people who are out there who are basically in one sense kind of lashing out because of their own wounding.
Yeah.
And it's and we can't really help them. I mean, they have to help themselves. I mean, I think this is one of the realizations that I came to in the last couple of years in particularly. It's like when I try to quote unquote help people or solve people or whatever else, I'm usually doing it from a place of codependency. I'm doing it because I want their approval, or I'm doing it because I want to try to control or whatever else, and it
Hmm.
doesn't work. And it just actually ends up damaging the relationships. And it's kind of the same thing with the hexing. Like if I'm going to go out there and hex somebody, and I think hexing can take some interesting forms. I mean, you could, for example, put a love spell on somebody. That's a hex.
That can be, yes, absolutely.
That can
Especially
be,
depending on how you go about the love spell. So yeah,
yeah,
there
I
are ways
mean,
to do it where free will and consent are part of it, but
right. And there can be consent violations, and that can be its
yeah.
own thing. So I mean that right there, and what I'm finding is like, and I found this really helpful in reading your book is kind of thinking about it like how much of this really for any given person is they're what they don't realize is that they're trying to use magic to work their issues out, but they're going about it the wrong way, and they're putting it on somebody else because they think that their problem is with that person when really it's with themselves.
I mean, one of the main reasons, again, I've kind of gotten a dog pile over the years, which given that I'm not particularly a shock jock on the internet, that I am, unless somebody's really crossing a line, I'm reasonably kind and polite. What it comes down to is I have ideas that freak people the F out, and especially around urbanism and its role in climate change. And people get very attached to their ideas and think they're protecting the world from something dangerous, which how many times in history does this happen? Where they're protecting the world from something dangerous that's really perhaps some ideas that need to be considered and integrated instead of reacted to, but they're really protecting their worldview. They think they found the right answer. They think that there is a South Park at the end where you die and you get told that the correct answer was Mormon, if you remember that movie at all.
I
Um,
don't, but I get the
there's one
point.
where everyone dies. It's like, and somebody raises their hand and says, "Well, I was Presbyterian. I was a devout Christian." And the handler on the organizing stage says the correct answer was Mormon. Like, as much as I may not like Trey Stone and Matt Parker, that movie was genius. So it really, really nailed a lot of things that needed to be nailed. Um, and so, yes, this probably has informed more of my spirituality than it should, but there was a lot of like almost how dare you, and then there's just a lot of things that if you stay within a very specific limited set of ways of doing things where you're honoring the elements good, you're honoring the seasons good, but you're not stepping outside of that, you're not making any experiments, it's safe enough. People can dismiss you or dismiss you as kooky. But when you do things like look into climate change, look into urban design, look into things outside of the allowed, things outside of the established popular aesthetic, people start thinking you're threatening their way of life. And protecting the way of life is where the most bullshit lives. This is why when you talk to people that are being hardcore about certain very rotten things in the world, it's always their way of life as opposed to protecting their lives, which is completely different.
Yeah.
Change happens. Get over it.
Well,
I'm still
it
mad
changes
that
the
some,
constant, right? I mean, there's no such thing as a static life, and trying to live a static life is actually one of the most unrealistic experiences that a person could have because change is inevitable.
yeah. Well, and trying to control someone else's ideas because you don't like how they feel in your body, that's putting the energy in the wrong place. And so there was stuff when I was writing Urban Magic, stuff would get triggered just when I sat down to write. It got so bad I was driving around the Bay Area, sleeping in my car in different places so I could get away from whatever trigger was chasing me long enough to finish the damn book.
Mm.
And I am working on the second half of that project now, but I am much better protected now, which helps. But it's also because it's the, oh, if it looks like I'm unprotected, it's a trap. And that's all I need to say about it. So um, my mental, like everything led to a breakdown. Everything led to a breakdown. And it's interesting because I kept notes on my breakdown and how I kept dealing with it because I had so much good help pop up along the way from unexpected people. And some of those people have not landed on the right side of history. And so it's that awkward thing of, when you get help by someone who's probably going to be featured on Behind the Bastards someday, if you're familiar with that podcast.
Mhm.
It's a podcast that does details on historical figures that were not so good people who sometimes did some pretty good things, but not always. Like there's definitely one in Aleister Crowley or Jack Parsons on there,
Mhm.
but they do this deep dive, and then the podcast host has a comedian on with him to comment on the historical deep dive as he tells the story. So
Ah,
I can't unhear the Moonies story, for example. I have a hard time going to buy sushi now. So there is just a lot of WTF. What am I doing when I am borderline public at best? All of the stuff landing on me. And what it comes down to is because I'm a woman that thinks and speaks, I got declared dangerous by a lot of people that I I'm a creative, so I don't think there's such a thing as having too much time on your hands. You have the time you have. But I really think, of course, because of my experience, I really wish they had turned that attention elsewhere. And I started doing I'm just going to word it out. I'm just going to let it bounce it off. But of course, this is a creative thing. So it turned into this I have to win BS. And it finally broke that part of me that needed to be nice, that needed to be seen as the better person. And I
the
let
good
go.
girl.
Yeah, I let go of the need to be seen as the better person. Okay, I may as well be the bitch queen. I mean, my friend Sarah recently told me that he had never seen anyone as centered in their queen bitch energy as I was when he met me, and I take that as the highest of compliments. But I was not there before.
No, I
I
get
was
it.
trying, yeah. The I'm not really crazy. Yes, this stuff is real. Yes, I understand this upsets you, but maybe if you come to understand, and now, like, I finally come to realize that whatever's going on with them, no matter how severe or violent towards me, it is about them. And their hatred of me is a them problem.
That it is. I mean, I think it's one of the most liberating experiences when you stop worrying about how other people feel about you and you stop living according to the good opinion of other people. Because
Yeah.
really, at that point, you're like, okay, I'm gonna live life on my terms, and it doesn't matter what. And it doesn't mean that I get to be an asshole and just do whatever, but it does mean that I get to choose the terms that I live my life on and do so unapologetically, without having to try and please everyone else around me. Because the fact of the matter is, you're not going to please everyone else around you. I certainly failed at that miserably throughout the years, and I'm sick and tired of it. So I'm like, yeah, I'm done. So I totally get that. I love that queen bitch energy. Go for it.
Yes. Yes.
Wear that energy, queen.
I think that I've been waiting for this my whole life, really. And I kept ending up with people that specifically didn't want me to step into that, knowing that it was waiting for me. And I think that this is the real thing people have been trying to prevent. And by trying to prevent it, they caused it because apparently people no longer actually get the message from Oedipus. So they created the situation, and hi, you created a monster. Now you get to deal with those consequences. And it's the I will do what I have to do to get someone the F off my lawn. And like most of my energy is either get the F off my lawn, If you come in mutual love, mutual respect, mutual honor, and you're willing to abide by the laws of hospitality, we will be fine even if we don't like each other. But you try to make it about I'm better, something will eat you. And I will laugh and watch it play soccer with your head. And that's just where I am at. And I would say that some of this perspective comes from being exposed to demon culture a little more and coming to understand that basically they don't want to be doing all the rotten stuff all the time. That's what they get asked for the most. They love more interesting projects. And they don't like, there are risks to working with me because I do tend to lean more towards angelic energy more easily. But we have a respect for each other that I wish I could attain with some humans.
Well, speaking as someone who works in very interesting ways with demonic spirits, I can tell you that yeah, like I find that that's much more delightful than doing some of the usual stuff. Now, there's something that I'm curious about that you're talking about in regards to urban design and stuff. Have you read Christopher Alexander's works at all?
Not yet. I am so
Oh,
behind on my reading list.
okay, well, when you get we'll have to talk about that. I've been reading
Okay.
some of his stuff. He was this really interesting architect who looked at urban design from a place of bringing life to places and bringing
That
life
sounds
to the environment. So it's yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
good. That sounds like a great palate cleanser to Le Corbusier. Like the minute they're talking about the proletariat, everybody's screwed.
Yeah.
So yeah. So definitely want to read that. I know it's kind of fun where I'm living now in Michigan is they have like a whole city reads a book like San Francisco did. And it's entertaining to me that when I moved to San Francisco, the whole city's book was reading The City by Armistead Maupin, which is a fictional account of what it was like to live in San Francisco in the 70s. And it really helped me understand the city. Where I am in Kalamazoo, they're trying to go more general because this is a city that wants to grow, but it still has a lot of rural culture integrated into it. And they're trying to be conscious because they're right at this precipice in their history. And so the group book is The Happy City,
Mm,
which so talking about integrating green space without live falling into gentrification. And it's it's interesting here because we have a disproportionately high unhoused population and a disproportionate amount of violence that goes back to its history as the first safe stop off the Underground Railroad,
mm,
or I think maybe the second. I think Gary, Indiana may have been the first because it was just far enough out of extradition that people could live in the open. And there's just some weird tensions around it that I'm still coming to understand because again, every place in America is, because of the individualism, is its own culture even within the same states, and learning that culture is part of learning how to work with the city energy here,
hmm
where sometimes it represents as like it will show up to me as an older black man always well dressed with a lot of stories to tell, and sometimes it will show up as a squirrel.
mm.
So just these extremes in identity. So sorry, I do tend to wander off into the
No,
weirdest
no,
things,
no,
don't
no,
I?
no, no, no. This just is making me think about my experience with Portland and then moving down to Eugene. You know, like my experience with Portland, I lived there for about 15 years. So I got to know that energy, the energy of that city. But what was interesting is even with that, there were like sections. So, you know, there was North Portland, there was Northeast, Southeast, Northwest, Southwest, and each of those had their own culture, their own reality, their own spirit, the genius Loki. And then I moved down to Eugene, and it's like it's a totally different experience, and you know it's a totally different culture in some ways. I mean, some people are like, oh well, Eugene and Portland have the same culture. It's not really. There are distinct differences, and it fascinates me because the way that we negotiate with a living space, part of it is of course negotiating with the other people that are there, but part of it's also negotiating with the spirits of the land and the other spirits that we collaboratively live with, the animals, the plants, everything else. And it's this whole continuum that's there that I think so many people miss out on most of that continuum. They're very people human centric, and that's what their focus is instead of looking at everything else that's going on.
I think the other part is it's very human centric. It's very Madonna whoring nature, where it's pure nature or it's not nature. Yet, that flower bed is, are you going to tell me that's unnatural? That's all organic material. And there's also the genius loci can be tricky because sometimes city spirits are part of the genius loci or extended from it, and sometimes they are completely independent. And it's not predictable how it's going to develop. Like one of my interesting experiences when I visited Albuquerque is Albuquerque is a city spirit that is not connected to the genius loci, but it almost acts as a servant to it,
Mm-hmm.
which seems to be a thing with deserts. Deserts have this whole service thing going on that I still don't fully understand, but it's really cool to watch. Other places like New Orleans and New York, the city spirit was independent and fused with the genius loci. They are one and the same now. It is odd to have my feet on that when I'm there in those places.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you have to completely decenter from any assumptions whatsoever and go, I am going to have to see something that I may not be able to stuff back into my current belief system. And this is something I run into a lot, is where someone will be like, a profound Kabbalist. Or I will see one where they are practicing one of those religions that are syncretic with Christianity. Excuse me just a moment.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the most common things I will get from a spirit worker that's consulting with me is, hey, I found this demon that I can't get rid of. And I will look at it, and it is either one of two things. Usually they're confusing animistic spirits with demons, because you can have the spirit of a squirrel, but the animistic spirit of squirrel is going to feel very different, and it will be uncomfortable for most humans. Like, nobody wants all squirrel at once. Like that lady that got, I don't know if you heard the story about the lady that like came home to 100 raccoons in her yard.
Mm.
It's kind of like that, except it's all one intelligence. And
Hive
people
mind.
think it's a demon. They're like, why can't I banish this demon? Well, it's an animistic spirit. It was here before. It is, was and is and ever shall be. It is way more permanent than you are. It was here first. You can't banish that.
No, you have to negotiate with it. You have to develop a relationship with it. And
Yeah.
this goes back to the point at the beginning where we talked about, relational, the importance of being relational. It's
Yes.
fascinating to me because again, like so much of the problem that I see in a lot of books on spirit work is very hierarchical, top down. Humans are at the top, or maybe Sky Daddy is at the top, and Sky Daddy gives humans power, and then humans have. It's like, well, that doesn't really work that way.
No, yeah. Animistic spirit work, there is no hierarchy. I mean, you do have to be realistic about, this could kill me faster than this, or I could potentially harm this. And you do have to look at it that way. You have to look at it from the Wild Kingdom perspective, where it is not personal. There is no favorites because there can't be. It is just nature being nature. The other thing I will see, and this comes back to non-animistic spirits, is about more than half the stuff I see demons get blamed for is fairies pulling things, because people romanticize fairies and do not fully understand what they really are and confuse them with Plant Davis.
Well,
And
I'll put it this way. I have a thing where sometimes stuff gets lost at my house, and I'm like, okay, go ask the fairies for it back.
mm-hmm.
And inevitably it comes back. So, I mean, that's a thing. Like, let's just be honest here. There are distinct differences.
Yes, well, that's when they're being cute. I have had situations, I don't know why, but Michigan is especially prone to fairy hauntings, where I have been approached because people started having fantasies about murdering their spouse that they'd been happy with for 20 years after moving into a certain house because of territorial gaming.
Yeah,
So,
that's a
like,
thing too.
yeah. And I mean, the other part with the hiding things, that's just an extortion racket. If you make them work for it, they stop hiding things.
Well, yeah, that's what I found. I mean, like I didn't have any, but I was like, oh, okay. I see
Oh,
what's going on here. And then, me
yeah.
get the thing back, and then after that be like, all right, we need to negotiate our relationship here. And
Oh yeah,
that's
you
always
have a
the
talk, you set boundaries. Fairies are threshold beings, which means that if you don't set boundaries, they're gonna cross every line they possibly can.
yeah.
So we have no fairies inside the house, but my fairies have found a way to bribe another spirit that is allowed in the house, which is why I woke up yesterday morning to find my glasses had somehow been placed in my coffee. We had a talk about not doing that and what they actually needed, and about not doing that.
So, where can people find you on the web?
You can find me at dianarachel.com. That's the easiest. I have a Substack called The Spirited Witch, and I have a Patreon that I am developing right now, also called The Spirited Witch Patreon, where I am digging up my old classes and posting some new material as I am able to over time. And of course, you can buy my books at just about anywhere books are sold, except
Excellent.
maybe not one of those Christian bookstore chains. I imagine I upset them a little bit.
Yeah, that probably so. You probably wouldn't even find your books there. But yeah.
Oh, urban magic, you might. I found out that there was an urban renewal church group. I want to say they were Baptist that had urban magic as required reading for some of their work.
Wow, there you go.
Yeah, that surprised me.
The things you learn.
I appreciate the open-mindedness, and a
Yeah.
way of rethinking is a way of rethinking, and it is a service-based book.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share with my audience?
Duck? No, seriously.
And cover.
Duck and cover. Always cover your tracks. I mean, my dad's advice to me was don't get caught, always hide the bodies. And specific to me is don't join a cult, but it's fine if you start one. Just make sure you have a good bookkeeper. Um, on a more
That's a good one.
yeah, on a more serious note, be open-minded enough to not assume that your religion is explaining all phenomena, because when you do that, you may end up staying in things that are impeding your health and progress that could easily be removed, transformed, or negotiated if you're willing to recognize that something is not fitting in the map that you are using for reality.
Hmm, I like that.
Not easy, but it helps once you get there.
For sure. All right. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure, and we'll definitely have to have you back on again here at some point in the meantime. And to my audience, I want to thank you for watching the show. Please share it. Let people hear Diana's wisdom. It is some really solid stuff, and I just love that queen bitch energy. That's fucking awesome. All right. Take care.